The silence in the auditorium was heavy, thick with the weight of ceremony and sacrifice. I stood on the stage, my dress uniform feeling stiff and foreign, and watched as General Hale held the medal case. My gaze drifted to the front row, to my father, retired Colonel Robert Jensen, a man who measured my entire life against the yardstick of his own past. He leaned toward my mother, his voice a stage whisper designed to carry. "She's useless," he said, the sound slicing through the reverent hush. All this for a glorified desk jockey. The air froze. A few heads turned. The general, a man I knew to be unflappable, stopped his speech mid-sentence. For a moment the only sound was the faint hum of the overhead lights. He calmly placed the gleaming metal case on the lectern, his movements slow and deliberate. Then, he picked up a slim, red-bordered file folder. His eyes, sharp, intelligent, and now cold as steel, found my father in the crowd. His voice was low, yet it filled the entire room. "The ambush was orchestrated by someone you trust," he stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. "The file proves they sold you out for their own gain." That moment of public reckoning had started just 12 hours earlier, under a deceptively clear Maryland sky. I was giving my family a tour of Fort Meade and my father was in his element, which is to say, he was miserable. He criticized the salutes from the junior enlisted guards, the efficiency of the gate security, the very architecture of the buildings. It was all a pale imitation of his army, a world that existed more in his memory than it ever did in reality. As we passed the monolithic headquarters of the National Security Agency, my direct superior, General Hale, happened to be walking toward us. Before I could even begin a proper introduction, my father sized up the 3 stars on the general's collar and stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Colonel Robert Jensen, retired," he boomed, his voice full of unearned familiarity. He gestured toward me with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Don't worry, General. I'm sure my daughter keeps your paperwork in order. Someone's got to handle the logistics for the real soldiers." He chuckled, thinking he'd just made a clever joke at my expense. He had no idea he'd just belittled me in front of the one man who had read every word of the classified after-action report on the ambush, the one I wrote. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand the 2 wars I was fighting, one overseas and one in my own family. That condescending dismissal from my father wasn't a new wound. It was the same one he'd been inflicting for years. I remember a family dinner about a year before the ceremony, the house loud with forced cheerfulness. My father, with his booming voice, stood to propose a toast. He raised his glass to my cousin, a newly promoted infantry sergeant, celebrating his grit, his courage, his real army accomplishments. The room cheered, and my cousin soaked in the admiration. It was his moment, and he'd earned it. I didn't begrudge him that. Later, when there was a lull in the conversation, I tried to share my own news. I mentioned I'd been selected to lead a new special projects team, a significant step in my career. My father, in the middle of cutting his steak, paused and patted my hand without even looking at me. "That's nice, sweetie," he said, his tone dripping with paternalistic indulgence. "More spreadsheets?" A few uncles chuckled, and that was the moment my new nickname was born. He started calling me his keyboard commando, and it stuck. It was the perfect little box to put me in, harmless, nerdy, and utterly irrelevant to the world of real danger and honor that he understood. I tried once or twice to explain the complexities of cyber warfare and signals intelligence, but their eyes would just glaze over. It was easier for them to imagine me in a cubicle than in a command center. But my world wasn't spreadsheets and coffee runs. My world was a sound-proofed, windowless room deep underground, a skiff, where the only light came from the cold blue glow of 24 monitors. The air was always chilled to protect the servers that hummed with a constant low thrum, the heartbeat of a hidden war. In that world, I wasn't the keyboard commando. I was the lead analyst and my call sign was Oracle. I remember one night, the relative quiet was shattered by a sudden alert. My screen lit up with encrypted enemy chatter. "We've got a chatter spike on the Tartarus network," I said, my voice calm, cutting through the tension. "They're using a ghost protocol to mask the cell's location. This is a pre-attack signature." My team looked to me. There was no hesitation, no questioning my authority. My father saw a girl playing on a computer, but these people saw the person who stood between them and a world of chaos. I need a SIGINT directive on these coordinates now, I commanded, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I'm initiating Operation Black Fog. In that moment, I made a split-second decision, rerouting a geosynchronous satellite, and running a predictive algorithm that cut through the enemy's digital camouflage. A location bloomed on the map, an ambush, set for a special forces team moving through the area. We got the warning out with less than 90 seconds to spare. 12 lives were saved that night. General Hale had been in the command center, observing. He didn't say a word, just watched me work. When it was over, and the confirmation came through that the team was safe, he simply walked over, placed a hand on my shoulder, and gave a single, firm nod. That silent gesture contained more respect than every hollow toast my father had ever made. It was a validation that came from a world built on competence, not on perception. Of course, my family never knew about moments like that. My mother, Helen, a woman whose primary mission in life was to avoid conflict, would try to smooth things over in her own way. She'd find me after one of my father's dismissive episodes and say, "You know how he is, honey. He's from the old guard. He just wants to see you safe behind a desk." She genuinely believed she was comforting me. But all I heard was another excuse, another layer of validation for his ignorance. She didn't understand that his words weren't about my safety. They were about his legacy. The only person who truly seemed to bridge my two worlds was Chief Warrant Officer Rick, a grizzled operator who was the team leader of the unit I had saved. He was a man of few words, carved from stone and cynicism, but he was fiercely loyal. He found me in the mess hall a week after Operation Black Fog. He didn't offer praise or flowery compliments. He just slid a cup of coffee across the table and sat down. "Oracle," he said, using my call sign like it was my real name. "Good call. You saved my boys." He took a sip of his own coffee. "I owe you." That was it. That was everything. From a man like Rick, that simple acknowledgement was a medal of honor in itself. It was a language of mutual respect my father could never, and would never, learn to speak. For years I let him believe his narrative. I let him think I was a glorified secretary because it was easier than fighting. But after the ambush, after I saw the price of betrayal, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. The truth had to be entered into the official record. After the ambush, my mission changed. My personal feelings of shock and betrayal were locked away, deemed non-essential. General Hale tasked me with leading the counterintelligence investigation to find the source of the leak, and I approached it with the cold detachment the job required. This wasn't about finding a villain for my story, this was about my sworn duty. The objective was a full-spectrum debriefing and source identification. Revenge was a messy, emotional motive. My goal was clinical, precise, and absolute. The truth. My life became a blur of long nights in the skiff, fueled by black coffee and a relentless focus. Emotion was a liability I couldn't afford. The work was painstaking, a search for a single digital needle in a planet-sized haystack. I analyzed petabytes of data, looking for the ghost in the machine. And then, I found it. A single exfiltrated data packet with a unique, forged digital signature. It was a whisper in a hurricane, but it was enough. I began a trace route, following the packet's path as it bounced through. A dozen encrypted servers, a phantom journey designed to be untraceable. But it made one mistake. It led me to a shell corporation with no assets, no employees, and a bank account in a country that didn't ask questions. When I pulled the financial disclosures, the picture became clearer and colder. The account had received a series of large wire transfers, payments from a known financial front for a hostile foreign intelligence service. I had the technical evidence, the SIGINT, but it was a trail without a face. For that, I went to Rick. I laid out the data on a monitor in a secure briefing room, the clean, undeniable path from our server to their bank account. I pointed to the name listed as the corporation's sole director. "Ever heard of him?" I asked. Rick leaned in, his eyes narrowed. He didn't need a database. He knew. "Yeah, I know him," he said, his voice low. "Disgraced contractor, got kicked out of the service for skimming logistics funds. He plays golf at the same club as your old man. The final piece didn't just click into place, it shattered everything. The abstract data points on my screen suddenly had a face, a handshake, a shared drink at the 19th hole. My father hadn't just been negligent. He had been a conduit. He hadn't just leaked data, he had sold the location of a U.S. Special Forces team for money. I felt a profound coldness settle deep in my bones. I went back to my terminal and began to type. The final document, code-named the Black Fog Report, was cold, factual, and damning. I followed protocol to the letter, classifying it, and submitting it directly up the chain of command to General Hale. With the report, I attached a formal request that my father be added to the guest list for the ceremony. The invitation was sent through official channels. My father RSVP'd with pride, telling everyone his daughter was finally getting a medal he could be proud of. He had no idea he was accepting an invitation to his own court-martial. The air inside the headquarters auditorium was still and heavy with history. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced generals, their gazes following you from the past. The room was a sea of dress uniforms, a tapestry of medals and ribbons earned in places I could only imagine. This was a space governed by absolute protocol and unwavering tradition. And in the front row, my father sat as if the entire event was a testament to his own life's work, his own service medals pinned proudly on his chest. He was preening, smiling at the officers around him, completely and utterly oblivious. He wasn't a guest here to honor his daughter, he was a relic, trying to catch the light from a sun that had long ago set on him. General Hale stood at the lectern, his voice steady and resonant, as he began to read the citation for the Medal of Honor. The words filled the cavernous room, painting a picture of a battle I knew intimately, but that felt like a stranger's story. For extraordinary heroism and gallantry at the risk of her life, he read. He described how I had remained at my post under direct and sustained cyber attack, how I worked to identify and warn a compromised team, and in that moment of profound honor, I heard it. A coarse whisper, sharp and venomous, cutting through the formal praise. She's useless. It was my father's voice. The insult landed, and a wave of cold silence rippled out from the front row. The general stopped speaking. Every head, every pair of eyes, felt locked in our direction. Time seemed to slow down. I watched as General Hale, with the patience of a predator, deliberately set down the metal case. He picked up the slim, red-bordered file, the Black Fog Report. My report. He looked past the lectern, his eyes finding my father and pinning him in his seat. Colonel Jensen, he began, and the way he used the retired rank felt less like an honorific and more like the beginning of an indictment. His voice was like ice. For the record, your daughter is the agent known only as Oracle, the lead analyst for Task Force Neptune. A murmur went through the room. The name Oracle was a legend in our community, a ghost in the machine, credited with preventing dozens of attacks. My father's face, which had been a mask of smug pride, began to flicker with confusion. The general wasn't finished. The ambush she thwarted, he continued, his voice hardening, was the direct result of an intelligence leak. He let that hang in the air for a moment. Then he opened the file. The investigation I ordered Captain Jensen to lead traced that leak to a shell corporation which received six-figure payments from a hostile foreign power. The general's gaze never left my father. Each word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of my father's legacy. He paused, letting the weight of his words crush the remaining oxygen from the room. I could feel my father shrinking, the life draining from him as the facts mounted. That corporation is owned by your business partner, the general stated flatly. And the access codes used to steal the data were your old credentials, reactivated with a bribe. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a low, chilling tone that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. He looked my father dead in the eye. You sold out an American Special Forces team, your own daughter's colleagues. The transformation was immediate and total. The color drained from my father's face, leaving behind a pale, slack-jawed mask of horror. He tried to rise, his body trembling. This is absurd. He sputtered, his voice cracking. I am a colonel of the United States Army. He was appealing to an authority he no longer possessed, to an honor he had sold. As if on cue, 2 uniformed military police officers materialized, taking up positions silently behind him. Their presence was the final unspoken verdict. His power, his bluster, his entire carefully constructed identity, it all evaporated under the cold institutional lights. He was just a civilian in a room full of soldiers who now knew him for what he was. A traitor. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. Instead, I fixed my gaze on the flag standing beside the stage, its colors vibrant and clear. My father had spent my entire life teaching me the importance of honor. In the end, it only took one file to show him and the world that he had none. As the heavy auditorium doors swung shut behind my father and his silent escort, a profound silence descended. It was a vacuum, holding the shock and the scandal of the last 5 minutes in suspended animation. The ceremony was broken. For a moment, I wasn't sure what would happen next. Then, General Hale turned back to me. His face was grim, etched with the difficulty of what he'd just had to do. But his eyes were filled with a deep, unwavering respect. He picked up the Medal of Honor from the lectern, its blue ribbon stark against his hand. He stepped forward and, with a steady, practiced motion, pinned it to my uniform. The weight of it was real, tangible. It felt heavier than just a piece of metal. It felt like the closing of a ledger, the final entry in a long and painful account. And then, a single person in the back of the room began to clap. Another joined in, then a dozen, and then the entire room erupted in a thunderous, sustained standing ovation. It wasn't pity, it was a roar of solidarity. It was the sound of my true family, the men and women I served with, closing ranks around me, acknowledging not my pain, but my strength. In the minutes that followed, officers and enlisted soldiers alike came up to me. Not one of them offered condolences. They shook my hand and congratulated me on my integrity, on my courage. They saw me for who I was, not for who I had come from. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings that I observed, from a distance, like watching a storm rage on a faraway coast. I didn't attend the trial. I didn't need to. I had already submitted my testimony in the form of the Black Fog Report. I learned of the verdict the same way the rest of the world did, from a news alert that flashed across my phone screen one afternoon. The headline was stark: disgraced colonel sentenced to life in prison for treason, espionage. The article detailed how Robert Jensen had been dishonorably stripped of his rank, his pension, and every last military honor he had clung to so desperately. His name was literally erased from the rolls of the institution he claimed to love. It was a quiet, sterile end to a loud and destructive life. A year later, my world was unrecognizable. I was Major Jensen now, and I was standing at a lectern at the Army War College, a place steeped in the highest echelons of military strategy. After my father's case exposed critical vulnerabilities, I had been tasked with building a new division from the ground up. I was now the head of the military's Counter-Insider Threat Directorate. I was briefing a room full of colonels and future generals on the very nature of modern betrayal. They listened with rapt attention. In this world, no one called me keyboard commando. They called me Major. They called me Ma'am. And in the quiet, secure hallways of Fort Meade, they still called me Oracle, a name now spoken with a kind of reverence. I had finally found a world where my worth was measured not by a dismissive nickname, but by the tangible results of my work. My life was no longer about craving the approval of a man who was incapable of giving it. It was defined by the quiet, earned respect of the competent, honorable people I now called my team. This was my new family, one forged not by blood, but by a shared mission and mutual trust. It was a foundation far stronger than the one I had left behind. A few weeks ago, a letter arrived at my office. I recognized the elegant, looping script on the envelope immediately. It was from my mother. I opened it and read the pages filled with predictable words: pleas for forgiveness, talk of the unbreakable bond of family, and a desperate attempt to explain away the unforgivable. I read it all, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a quiet, calm detachment, like reading an intelligence report about a forgotten conflict. The words had no power here. My peace was no longer contingent on their apology. I folded the letter neatly, walked over to the secure filing cabinet in the corner of my office and opened the drawer labeled Jensen Robert, case file. I placed the letter inside, among the cold hard facts of his betrayal. I closed the drawer and turned the key. My legacy wasn't in that file. It was here, in this office, in the work waiting for me on my desk. My father believed a legacy was a name you passed down. I learned a true legacy is a standard you uphold, especially when it costs you everything. If you've ever had to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it, share your story below. In this community, your expertise is always recognized.